July 12th. It's free, like the dandelions on the bike path.
Okay. Well, you set it up. I'll leave you to set
Good
it up.
afternoon and welcome to another edition of What We Should Know, coming to you from Cambridge Community Television here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Paul Stephenstone is with us.
Happily. Pleasure to be here.
It's always great having you, Paul. Paul, you were mentioning about the new home you moved into and about the questions of
Yes.
lines of property, etc.
Yeah, well, there was an unfortunate incident where in laying out plot lines so that we would know where we could put a driveway, we discovered that land that had previously been thought of as belonging to my neighbor was actually part of our plot. And so, you know how they say good fences make good neighbors?
And that's what they say. I've heard that.
Yeah. Well, this apparently tore the fences down. And it was I give him all the credit in the world. He just took it in. I told him what this was about. He took it in and, just sort of fumed for the next few days. And I don't blame him for fuming. There are very few parking spots around here. So if we were effectively killing one of his 3 parking spots, he was feeling a real sense of loss. Sunday, we told him that we're not going to need that. He can feel free to park there. So the issue for him, I think, has kind of fallen to the wayside.
Good.
There's another neighbor who took offense at his being treated like that. So we'll see where all that ends up. But we were talking about a concept, folks, I will explain as simply as I can. It's not a simple concept. And quite honestly, if you don't believe in karma, you're going to find yourself even more befuddled.
I've got a definition here.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Of karma. Okay. Why don't you read that?
Let's see if we can.
Great.
Well, unfortunately,
Excuse me while I sip.
I've just, why can't we get this?
There it
we
is.
go, right there. It says, karma means action, work, or deed. It also refers to a spiritual principle of cause and effect, where intent and actions of an individual influence the future of that individual.
And they're trying to make it easy. They're trying to make it palatable. They're sugarcoating a little because essentially karma works within an incarnation or across generations of incarnations. So you could be doing, Adolf Hitler right now is probably paying big time for his previous karmic, let's say,
Errors.
crimes.
Crimes. Good.
But we have the ability to do good, to do bad, or to basically be non-existent in the way we interact with people. Mostly, we have no choice but to have interactions with people, and that generally sets up opportunities to do things positively or not, right action or wrong action. So karma is where if you've done right action, there will be a benefit in the future, and if you've done a bad action, then there will be some sort of balance and redress. And I have no idea how this is balanced and figured out. The universe has its own scales, but nobody consults me how they work. And then we were talking about a concept that I've named. This is my own. I coined this expression, a karmic gravitational slide. And many of you will probably recognize this. Because we've had karmic consequences to pay off in this lifetime, we periodically find ourselves headed for a karmically appropriate intersection of people or events or challenges, and how we react to them is us working out the karma. Now, that particular karmic intersection, to get to that point, you need a number of different elements to fall into play. If it involves people, if it involves your job, if it involves the state of war, whatever it involves, all that has to come into play. If you were fated to meet somebody, then somehow karma would have to basically work with both life arcs to get the two of you in the same spot at the same time. And I think there's a certain energy. I've noticed that with my soulmates. There's a certain energy that you feel drawn. It's magnetic. It's very magnetic. So a karmic gravitational slide is basically once events start to take place, and all of us can observe how we can't seem to stop something from happening. When I was going through difficult times in my first marriage, and my ex-wife had, she didn't have an affair, but she had a relationship with a patient that was inappropriate. Because quite honestly, she was not being supervised with a borderline patient. And that's very dangerous, as I've explained to you. So what happens is that once you try to do something to impede the karmic intersection that we were talking about, you find that every event that you try to manipulate or control, no matter how well you control it or manipulate it, still works to serve that particular karmic interaction.
Fascinating.
Right. So maybe it's a car accident on top of losing your job, on top of your marriage falling apart, taking you to a certain place. But that's what I term a karmic gravitational slide.
And you say, Paul, if I've understood you correctly, you say that for a reason that people have recognized it because you've used that term in your book.
My novel, or so it seems, I use that term quite frequently. And in my new novel, which is Perfidious Blossom, it's still being written. Not while I'm sitting here, but obviously it's still being written. Because the reality is that's a key principle in our lives, and we're totally unaware of it. It's very interesting to me. And this is just from observation. I could be totally wrong. With anything I say that I've observed, and any conclusion I've drawn, I could be totally wrong. So I don't want to say this is something you're going to find on Wikipedia, at least not until a lot of you folks go out and buy my novel. But I believe...
Which will explain the karmic slide concept.
The karmic...
The karmic.
Oh, yes, right. Maybe that's what this is ultimately leading to. But I think in our own lives, we can look at many times where we felt all events just sliding toward or leading towards a certain kind of epiphany or climax.
Inexorably.
Yes, inexorably, good word. Ineluctably. And that's a karmic gravitational slide.
Paul, that's a great introduction to a subject that I was interested in you're addressing the public today about your move to a new home and the complications of neighbors and how
yes.
how complicated a situation gets when one is in a situation, one is moved into a new home, the neighbors are there, the question of redistribution of boundaries or of setting up social relations is a very complicated process apparently.
And you know, I often say that the times of sand cover everything, and sometimes pretty quickly. So that includes property lines, and that includes boundaries. And when we were laying out our driveway, I asked the site engineer, because you have to have a site engineer before you can do any of the work on the property, to have his people lay out the plot, dimensions or the boundary lines. Yeah.
With wooden stakes or so, is that what they do?
Yeah, that's what they do. So I came home, they laid these out, and one of them, one corner stake, was in land that I had previously thought belonged to my neighbor. I've lived in this area for 8-9 summers. Only this year we tore down our cottage and we built a house, so now everything is changing. So I saw that this plot line was leading into his property, what we thought of as his property. So I was coming home from somewhere and I noticed that that stake and another stake had been pulled out. And I knew who pulled it out. I mean, and I don't blame him, but I went in and I talked to him and I explained, it turned out that, he'd been parking on our property. He'd been storing his lumber on our property.
For a while.
For a while, yeah. Yeah, probably long enough to have gotten adverse, what do they call it? Adverse possession?
Feedback?
No, there's a way in which you can take ownership of...
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Oh, let me see, what would that be called?
squatters' rights.
Using something over a period of time, it becomes yours, or you have an influence over it.
Right.
You have a right to it.
Adverse something.
Yes, I'm sorry.
The term. But anyway, he wasn't playing those games. I don't know that he's the one that got that extra bit of property on his side. But it doesn't matter. The sands of time will have obliterated the reality of its causation, and now we just have to deal with it. And my particular personality or my makeup is such that if I see something that I'm supposed to do, that's appropriate for me to do, that would be inappropriate for me not to do, I do it. And I regard myself as a steward of that property. And finding out that the property line had been actually misappropriated, I felt I had to correct it. And so I went over and talked to him, and it ultimately worked out. We told him he could park there. He had to wait until I put the stake back in, and I said I would pull it out and put a marker there. Because I needed to have my property defined clearly, and then we would put a marker there. But he could park. It wouldn't block him. He could park there again. And I even left a verge that would make it look like our properties were separate. And it's really, it occurs on my property, that verge. And I don't know yet if that's gonna cool him out or not. He was unhappy for a while. We'll see where it leads. But, ultimately you have to follow your own inner guide. And if something comes to you that seems appropriate to do, you have to do it. And it may not be pleasant. And, it doesn't say much about you if you only do the pleasant stuff. So,
it cost an effort. It was a serious effort on your part to go through that mediation, that negotiation process. But because you have an understanding of karma, and because you follow this understanding ethically, morally, because of your conviction that karma is a real, not only a real concept, but the moral, ethical path that the universe has chosen.
Right. You are handed things. When something comes to me, I deal with it. I didn't seek out being with you on your show periodically, but it came to me, we did it, I enjoyed it, and so it continues. There are plenty of less pleasant activities that I'm involved in that I do also because I have to.
I'm very thankful for that.
No, I enjoy our usually every 2 week bi-weekly.
It's terrific. We enjoy it here, and from the massive feedback that we get.
Somebody waves as they go by the window here.
Right, or people stand outside the studio in lines passing donuts and coffee at times. Of course, you can't really see this, but it's like the Good Morning America show. Wasn't that what that show was called?
It might be the Today Show, one or the other, because they do it, I think, from Rockefeller Center. That was
it's true.
Show. Yes. Anyway, I wanted to give a call out, if I might, to
Please.
My friends at the Cambridge Residents Alliance. I think they're fighting a good battle, and they just had a picnic yesterday, a fundraising picnic where they honored 3 women in Cambridge who have done a lot for the community, one of whom passed away last year. I think Renee Gray was her name. And the people at the Cambridge Residents Alliance are fighting the good fight. They're trying to get enough affordable housing for people that need it. They're trying to prevent, as best they can, Cambridge from turning into a sea of luxury developments. And quite honestly, they're having to fight a city council and they have a variety of reasons to explain why they favor these developments. But when all is said and done, they all gain a lot of campaign contributions from these developers, and that's kind of sorry, because in this state, conflict of interest is not a reason to recuse yourself when it should be. But keep your eye out for your own karmic gravitational slides. I'm kind of interested to see where Trump's activities and all his behavior will lead him, because I do think he's setting himself up for a real disastrous time. It may not be in this life. We may not get to enjoy it. But at some level, everything he does bad will come back to him. And I don't wish anybody harm. I mean, or certainly not harm to their loved ones. But, with karma, I think anything is fair game. So.
So this international, if you could help our viewers and myself as well, Paul. So it's an ethical guideline that the entire universe is subject to? All living beings in the universe are subject to this karma principle?
I think so. I think that's just the way the system was set up. Don't ask me who set it up, but that seems to be the way it works. And it's a Hindu concept coming out of India, but it's not seen as somebody making ethical judgments. The reality is we each make our own ethical judgments. And I think we're actually the ones that keep track of what we did right and what we did wrong. We just don't know it. The Jewish tradition talks about the Akashic, what do they call it? Records, which is supposedly the place where everything you've done has been recorded. There's a great movie with, who's that guy? He's fighting for his life, defending your life, Albert something. What's his name? Albert. And they have video of everything he did, every bad thing he did, or every good thing he did. And they bring it up and he's got to explain himself and he has to, basically defend his life. And that might be something that's more true than we realize. But I think the ethical and moral judgments come from our motivation. I think if you did something that on the outside looked like you were helping people and you were actually stepping over people to help yourself, I don't think that would ever be accidentally recorded as a good deed. I think you would have that as something that you have to, at some point pay the piper for.
So they know your motivation. This system hears, we as an individual know our motivation, and that's what's important. And the documentation is written by ourselves, with our own conscience, with our own state of knowledge.
Well, the Hindus talk about Brahman, which is God out there, and Atman, which is God in here. And I think that principle holds true with something like karma. And I have no idea how this thing could work, what are the mechanics of it, but I do think it works. And I don't think you can, unfortunately, I don't think you can expect to see karmic payoffs come in one lifetime or another. Yeah, it has to happen over a period of time. In my novel, or so it seems, the character is paying off some debts from the previous existence. So that's how karmic gravitational slide comes into play there. Relevant to his son and his desire to be a good father. So it's a good novel, people.
Is it autobiographical to some extent?
To some extent. I think my experience as a writer would tell me that anything that has some real believability and real substance to it has autobiographical content. It's hard to
separate.
Well, you'll read. There's a lot in my book that's fantastic. I mean, there's a Hindu guru that appears periodically for the main character, whose name is Bapu Charya. The Bapu Charya. Bapu is Hindu or Hindi for father. That's what they called Mahatma Gandhi. So, and Charya is basically kind of a religious honorarium. There's, my memory. I used to have a lot more access to.
Paul Stephen Stone. It's always fascinating. Paul, the movie you mentioned, we've got a trailer here. Would you be interested in getting a look at this trailer?
Sure.
That's it's a short piece, but it might be interesting.
With a click, with a shock, from the tree by door we knock, under the light, something's coming my way.
From the beginning of motion picture history, Hollywood has tried to show you what the afterlife is really like.
Good afternoon and welcome to Judgment City.
You have any idea what's going on?
No?
Well, in a nutshell, you're here to defend your life, and I'm going to help you.
Defend my life?
Finally,
Wow!
the first true story of what happens after you die.
Where am I? Is this heaven?
No, it isn't heaven.
Is it hell?
Actually, there is no hell. Although I hear Los Angeles is getting pretty close.
Didn't anyone ever tell you you carry yourself very stiffly?
Leave me alone, I'm dead. That's life.
Albert Brooks,
You make me think of my little poodle.
Mel Brooks' son?
Meryl Streep,
I think I might have been a heavy-set man at one time.
Rip Torn,
He's
Lee
great.
Grant, Buck Henry, in a new film by Albert Brooks.
So I'm on trial for being afraid.
Well, first of all, I don't like to call it a trial. Second of all, yes.
If you see one movie before you die,
I love you.
I love you.
This is damn exciting stuff.
see Defending Your Life.
Most people.
That looks to be really comical.
And I think there's a message there. I mean, there really is, because ultimately, some people act as though they'll never have any consequences for what they do. I mean, I think that's what Trump is doing. And I think, one thing I want to sort of clear up, you had talked about my awareness of karma somehow having an impact on my behavior, which would be fear-based. And I have a real strong desire to live a decent life. That's pretty much, if anything, I kind of want to leave a better world for my kids. And if I fight really strongly for something, it's because I think it's going to protect them. So there's a certain vested interest in that. But I never act out of the fact that I'm going to have to pay for some deed in future, either life or future period in my life. So.
I'm sorry if my words led to that conclusion, Paul, because I know something about your political sense and your sense of justice, and that seems to align with the idea of an interest in leaving this world a better place in terms of justice for all, or in terms of the concept of justice. Equality. And I see you acting not in your own interest, but in a moral way politically. And I believe you make your political judgments either entirely in reference to the idea of justice, or at least very strongly in reference to justice for all.
Thank you. I wouldn't argue with that. I got involved in fighting the Weymouth Naval Air Station. This is a good example of a fight that I thought was a good fight. When the Navy pulled out of that, they gave the land to the 3 towns that are bordered, that actually it occupies it. It borders Weymouth, Rockland, and I think Hingham, and or some other town. But almost immediately, the people that were in control of the future of this particular plot of land, which was a group made up of representatives from all 3 towns, started to get wined and dined by this company that builds these malls, these giant malls, and they attract millions and millions of people to these malls every year. And in some states, they're the biggest tourist sites. And their concept was shoppertainment. It wasn't entertainment, it wasn't just shopping. It was shoppertainment.
What a night.
And to think of these people bringing this, I don't judge what they were doing. I judge it by the success of it. Where this air station is located would have been devastated by having millions of additional car rides, because it would have brought in millions of additional people. And so it was the wrong thing for this. I mean, all my children who live on the South Shore would have been affected by it, as would be a lot of my friends. And there would be a lot of good things in terms of jobs, in terms of finding something productive to do with the land, but it really was a very short-sighted thing. And these people brought in a lot of money and a lot of muscle, and fortunately the Conservation Law Foundation, who I eventually became associated with, fought with us on our side. And I did some ads the group ran one ad in Patriot Ledger, and then I paid for an ad myself to run in the Rockland newspaper, whatever that was, when they were about to have a referendum. And it just seemed like this was too big to allow people with a lot of money to come in and get their way. Too important. And that's, it's very hard for me to allow money to be the reason why things get done, rather than the good it does to a community. That's why I was fighting this Normandy Twining Tower, which I think by using money to secure political might had basically kind of steamrolled the community. And this thing, the council was so quick to approve these folks that when there was a difficulty with some of the writing, they approved it in absence of the actual final draft. You know, you could have included a lifetime job for Bozo the Clown, and they would have approved it. You know, it was that much of a done deal by the time it got to the council to vote on. And anybody here cares to refute that, feel free. But the truth of the matter is, every one of the councilors, except for Craig, whatever his name is, Craig, I can't remember his name.
I'm not sure.
It'll come to me. But Craig is the only one that had only a very small donation from the developer. He may have gotten a lot more after, because I heard he takes developer donations now. But every one of them had thousands of dollars in donations from the developer. And I don't think they should have been allowed to vote. They should have, if they had personal integrity, they would have said, I can't vote for this because the reality is I have too much of a conflict of interest.
They should recluse themselves, is that what it's called?
Yeah, recuse, yeah.
So, long-term, the argumentation I believe that you may be making is public-funded election cycles or public-funded election
Yes, clean elections.
structures. Right. That would definitely be something that the public could afford, and
Truth is, they can't afford not to have it. Too much money gets absolutely corrupted and thrown into things that shouldn't be thrown into. And we had clean elections, and the legislature killed it. Finneran, who was very powerful at the time, he basically sat on it and wouldn't allow anybody to put it into effect. And by the time he was told he had to do it by the court system, which he had threatened the court system to not force them to, enact clean elections. But by the time the court system finally responded, it was already dead, and it became ineffectual. I was working on Jill Stein's campaign for governor at the time, and unfortunately somebody made a clerical mistake and didn't mark things correctly on the forms that all the people had assigned. Oh my God. Yeah, so she didn't get any of that money. It's really very hard. It's pushing boulders uphill to try to get some fair, honest, and clean elections.
so there seem to be so many steps in getting legislation approved and getting it voted upon that there seems to be myriad ways of postponing it or making it illegal or disqualifying it. That's all part of the political process.
Right. And that's, yes, I mean, even you had mentioned Baker putting a halt, and maybe with the legislature, for an 18-month period of extending the deadline, 18 months for enacting
Marijuana.
yes, legalized marijuana sales. And you don't have to be a soldier with PSDT to get it no longer. You can actually get it if you're just a normal human being with PSTD.
Should we get a look at that? Paul, in one of the articles is lawmakers are significantly delaying the rollout of marijuana legalization in Massachusetts, barring the commercial sale of an additional 6 months despite the popular ballot vote. I believe that the idea was that a ballot initiative was to be started. It was voted upon, I believe, in 2016, and overwhelmingly by 53% to, I believe, 43%, the public Massachusetts votership passed this ballot initiative to legalize marijuana, and then legalize recreational marijuana.
Right. They'd already legalized medical marijuana. Correct.
But the rollout of medical marijuana had taken a very long period of time, and then the question was, because Governor Baker and 6 of his, at least, or approximately 6 of his political allies then postponed the implementation of the voter-approved initiative by a period of 18 months. The question, of course, is the great need in Massachusetts for tax revenue is completely neglected in this Baker postponing of the implementation of marijuana, because there is a massive negative or deficit in the proposed budget for 2018, which could have been overcome, I believe, through the implementation of the voter-approved legalization of recreational marijuana. And it seems to be in conflict with the interests of the people, not only because the part of the budget which is losing funds are schools, healthcare, childcare, health and human services, etc. Seems to be the parts of the budget that are being defunded, whereby the implementation of police, etc., is being funded completely.
Well, that's a very Republican way of approaching the needs of a multivariate community. Just increase the police and military budgets and decimate everything else. We've seen that with Trump. He's trying to kill the EPA. He's trying to basically put somebody that will drive the Department of Education into a wall. He put somebody in charge who will do that. Trump is going to have a karmic gravitational slide of his own, and I think he's already earned a lot of credit for that long before he became president. But I had a different opinion of him before he became president. It's interesting how it totally dived, and I don't believe the media. I think the media is totally untrustworthy when it comes to Trump, because the media and the intelligence agencies, vis-a-vis the deep state, are out to get him. They're out to have their own little coup d'etat. Hillary's coup d'etat didn't work with them helping. So it's a very confused time right now in American politics. The American political system is absolutely corrupt, totally. The Democrats used to have a certain amount of integrity. I think they totally sold it when the Clintons took over to make Hillary, coronate Hillary as the president, which didn't obviously happen. So, and the Democrats will not listen. I mean, there's a quote by Stephen Douglas which talks about the fact that power will never relinquish power unless they are absolutely forced to. And so you're seeing that now in the Democratic Party structure. The people that are in power are holding on to it, and they're the ones that set up Trump's victory, because they refuse to allow an honest election to take place in the Democratic primaries. So they are responsible for Trump in my mind. You may dislike Trump. I don't think some of the things he's being accused of are real. I think the Russian story was an outgrowth of the Democrats trying to distract people from looking at the content of the DNC emails, which talked about the fact that the election was rigged. And in fact, their defense in Washington, they're now defending themselves in court by someone who talked about the fact that they totally abandoned their fiduciary responsibility to all people who participated by having somebody picked and anointed. And I think they should win. But the Democrats their answer was that they had a right to rig it if they wanted to.
Yeah.
And everybody knew it was a rigged situation, so nobody should be surprised at it if in fact their money that they sent to Bernie Sanders, ended up being totally, useless. So
I think that's very true, Paul. The Democrats blocked Bernie Sanders completely. There was public radio, NPR did not mention Sanders and his 47% of the total caucus and primary election prior to the DNC meeting.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's been conservatively estimated that Hillary and her minions stole 13. I've seen any number of
13
primaries.
states?
Primaries.
13 primaries.
And that may include caucuses, so I don't know what, because Iowa, there was actual footage of people miscounting the number of people that were for Hillary versus Bernie and things of that sort. So Iowa, that was the kickoff to the whole thing, was already kind of corrupting or corrupted. But 13 is, I think, the conservative estimate, and I've heard up to 23 primaries. You know, you have New York was absolutely a steal. If you take a look at the votes on the New York State, everything goes to Bernie except for this little block in New York City. The entire state went for Bernie except for this little block, I mean geographic block, not voting block. And it's just pathetic. It's really pathetic because it's so obvious and nobody seems to do anything about it. In Chicago, they proved that there was some sort of malfeasance at the voting, in the voting electronic voting machines, and the people that were in charge of the hearing about the election results said, well, that's all well and good. You've made your point. Now let's go on to the next one, as though it wasn't actionable. My God, there's been a crime, but let's not act on it.
Right.
So we live in a very strange world.
There's no reason for me to laugh inappropriately here. The reality is that those in power are not going to relinquish their power. Those in, to paraphrase your text, those in power are not going to relinquish their power because that's the reason they take these jobs. That's what they do to get into these positions of power. They have no interest in relinquishing it because that is their only reason for moving forward professionally or politically to get this position.
And they're all interlocked.
And they're all interlocked with one another.
You can't dislodge one of them because they're so tightly gripping the next guy that's in there to hold on to his or her power.
It's a cabal. The word of cabal,
Yeah.
I think, fits very closely there.
Exactly. Well, I think cabal sometimes suggests more thought than I would see here. I don't think these people think very much. I think they react. I think they have the power, they get the decent salaries, and they don't want to let go of them. So I'm not sure how much thought gets involved. But Frederick Douglass talked about the need for protest. He said the people that don't want change want rain without thunder and lightning. I can't remember the entire quote, but it's very apt.
It is interesting.
And we need to protest. We need to speak up because we're getting hosed down whether we like it or not. And if we don't speak up, we're not going to like where we end up.
Karma, again, can we get back to this idea? We're not going to like where we end up. And this is in reference to many of us don't believe in karma, but whether or not we believe in it, it may be the principle which governs the universe.
It may be. The one thing that I will make as a caveat, what we see as good and bad may not be what ultimately karma presents to us. Because the reality is we're here on this planet, in this incarnation, to move forward in our evolution, in our spiritual evolution.
Interesting.
And so really what's good and what's bad are whatever contributes to my evolution or whatever takes away from my evolution. So it's not like I'm going to suddenly find a $10 bill in the street because that makes me feel happy. The reality might be that I get a $10 bill in the street and it's an opportunity for me to somehow move a step further. I find the owner of the $10 bill, I turn it into the police. It's an opportunity. Maybe that's the karmic response to something I did in the past. Getting an opportunity to move my soul a little bit further up the mountain.
And then we make the decision whether or not we follow that ethically correct position.
Right.
And that's not a religious concept at all, is it? It's more, it is an ethical concept.
Yes, yeah. The universe, I mean, if Dr. King and others who have said it talked about the arc of the universe bending towards spiritual progress. It wasn't phrased that way, but that's essentially what was said. And I think that's true. and I think that's one of the things that I hold to when I see something like what's happening in the White House. The White House right now is totally without principle, totally without ethics. I mean, they threw out ethics. It was like the first, drunk guest at the party. They threw them right out. And morality. And so they've taken off all the things that will keep people acting in very judicious and sensible ways. And, they're trusting on the fact that these people will be honest in their dealings, which is absolutely silly. In Washington, nobody's honest if they don't have to be. Or very few people are honest.
If there are no consequences, if there's
Right.
no one actually watching what they're doing
Right.
and ready to, the Department of Justice or, the Attorney General, not willing to interact with them.
Well, what did it tell us about the Department of Justice, and even under Obama, the rule of justice, to have Loretta Lynch meeting with Bill Clinton, in a little shady, inside a small plane on an airport, and it just happened to be
Before the election.
3 days before she was exonerated, before Bill Clinton's wife was exonerated by the FBI.
Comey.
Yeah, what it said was that the administration had no interest in preserving the dignity and integrity, the perceived dignity and integrity of the justice system or the Justice Department. Obama turned out to, last days of the Obama administration were sort of like the fall of Pompeii. The lava slowly comes down and is going to cover everybody. I don't know how people didn't wake up and run, but it covers everybody. And whether it's Standing Rock, Obama didn't. He was disgraceful with Standing Rock. Disgraceful. He had been at Standing Rock and promised to treat Native Americans differently, as though they were real Americans. And he's totally lied to them. He totally abandoned his promise. So the thing with Hillary, though, I signed at least 2 petitions on the We the People, which goes to the White House, that had over 100,000 signatures each, asking him to investigate and, if possible, stop the illegal stealing of primary elections in the Democratic primaries. And nothing was ever done, nothing was ever said. When somebody asked about the ability to conduct a fair and honest election, they were talking about the one coming up with Hillary and Donald, but Obama cracked a smile on his face as though he'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. And nobody had, because the media was totally on Hillary's side, they had no interest in talking about her stealing elections. So Obama, to me, totally abandoned his principles. And right now he looks righteous and principled because he's standing next to Mr. Unrighteous and Mr. Unprincipled, who's grabbing at pussies wherever he can find them. Weird.
Paul, can we? I agree completely with your estimate there. Interesting is the idea that comparing Obama to Donald Trump, Obama looks great, but examining actually what he did from a legal standpoint, he did not question the torture memos. He did not close Guantanamo. He did not examine constitutional positioning, although he's a constitutional lawyer, which he could have done in his office as a constitutional lawyer, put up a number of questions that would have moved the status of constitutional law further along. The emoluments clause would be an example of that. Mm-hmm. He saw that Donald Trump had been elected. He was the president-elect. It would have been possible for him to examine exactly what questions are coming up, and then, as a constitutional lawyer, then initiate a hearing of some kind in reference to his emoluments clause, and he did nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think he was Mr. Cool, and he wasn't interested in working up a sweat, quite honestly. The thing that I found most disappointing was when the Dakota Access Pipeline people set attack dogs on the protesters. I think at that point, if not before, he should have sent in U.S. Marshals like Eisenhower did in Arkansas to protect people. And what he did was he put a fig leaf over the whole thing by saying, well, he's asking the Corps of Engineers to re-examine the permission. And he knew that would be overturned within minutes after he was out of office. So he didn't help anybody. All he did was made himself look better. You know, so to me, that was the kind of shallow, meaningless kind of effort that you could expect from Obama. His first term, I think he did a lot of good stuff. I won't take that away from him. I think the way he handled the BP crisis was amazing. He forced them to give $20 billion to the government to keep people from, you know, going out of business and keep them afloat. And he handled that pretty well. And also the General Motors thing. I remember when he pushed out the guy who was running General Motors when it went kaboom, crash. And he kind of forced them to have somebody in there managing it with a much better point of view than being one of the old GM hacks that would come up through the system. So in the first administration, when I wrote up pieces that talked about why I would support him, I found a lot of things that I could point to. In the second term, I don't think so much, and absolutely nothing when it comes to his allowing Hillary to just run roughshod over the Democratic Party and the electoral process. The fact that nobody right now is writing laws to try to make sure that the presidential election can't be stolen. I mean, if you really think that Russians and outsiders are coming in, don't you close the door the first thing you do?
Exactly.
You know why they're leaving the door open? Because they all want to be involved in stealing the next election.
It's true.
It's crazy.
It is.
So,
Paul, the point you're taking now is of central importance, and the idea of the Democratic Party and parts of the Republican Party continually pointing to Russia as though Russia stole our election. How about politicians getting together and creating an election system so that it can't be stolen neither by Russia nor by China or South Vietnam?
and let's go back to morality and ethics. How about making sure that our hidden Secret Service people, you know, the people that are out around the world doing things for us, are not allowed to steal elections themselves?
Oh.
Honduras is thrown into chaos when Hillary Clinton approved a coup there, and the freely elected president had to go run and hide to keep from getting killed. And that was the U.S. If the U.S. said no, you can't do that, it wouldn't have happened.
It's true.
And we have, from Vietnam on down, we have participated in. I mean, we are the worst offenders of all. And how, you know, what kind of pot calling the kettle black is this for us to be worried about Russians sending in hackers? And those DNC emails were not hacked, they were leaked. And that's a big difference. That's why WikiLeaks has them. They were leaked to you know, and probably Seth Richard, whose death probably will never be fully examined or investigated. There are people in the third world press in the United States, you know, the alternate press, that are totally convinced that Seth Richard was killed by the Democratic insiders, and that they've kept it from being investigated, and that they're still trying to investigate it. There's a fellow, George, I can't remember his name, but there are people that are working on it. There's a good show, Michael Trim is interesting sometimes. There are a number of people that, the Sane Progressive, remember her from the Bernie campaign? She's got a lot of good things to say. There are a lot
Sane
of people,
progressives?
Sane, S-A-N-E, the Sane Progressive, Debbie something, I don't remember her last name.
Good.
And Tim Black, and there, you know, Nina Turner. There are a lot of good people out there speaking the truth, but it never gets out. The media does not want to. Sean Hannity, who I don't regard particularly favorably, has been talking about the Seth Richard murder, and he got totally pounced on by everybody, including Fox. So he had to back off. A Democratic Party spokesperson has become the spokesperson for Seth Richard's family. We don't know if it's approved or accepted, but that's what's happening. And that Democratic Party spokesperson said that the family would like people to stop speculating. So they're trying every which way they can to shut this thing down. What will they be able to? I don't know. You're going to need somebody. You're not going to find a who are the fellows that broke the Watergate.
Oh, that's interesting.
Oh God!
It's not Hirsch. Watergate.
No, it wasn't Hirsch. It was Woodward and Bernstein.
Exactly.
Yes.
Congratulations.
You're not going to find a Woodward and Bernstein rising because the owners of the paper would not allow it. There's not a Katharine Graham, there's not a Ben Bradley. The papers are totally, they're either convinced of this stuff being all conspiracy talk, or they're just convinced that anybody that says something that's different than what they want to say is wrong, which I think is more likely the story.
Paul, did you have the opportunity when Comey was being interviewed, I believe it was last Thursday,
Testifying?
did you actually have an opportunity to listen to the testimony and the questions, etc.?
No, I had the opportunity. I chose not to.
Uh-huh.
What I chose to do was I went and I went online to watch. Who was it? PBS NewsHour covering it. And PBS, keep in mind, just as you said, they never mentioned the fact that the election was being stolen. And when they interviewed Jill Stein, they cut out anything that she said that was in their minds provocative. They're so kowtowed to the corporate establishment now. It's really sad. But
is there an opportunity, do you see an opportunity in alternative media to gain enough influence and power and public awareness so that NPR or the established networks can be counteracted or neutralized to some extent?
that would be very hard. I mean, you've got Democracy Now!, you've got RT, which the mainstream media has really tried to discredit because RT stands for Russia Today. And I wonder strategically if that was the best name they could have chosen for themselves. But that aside, there's a fellow Lee Camp, and what he does is he presents what I believe is the truth, certainly something closer to the truth than anything you would get from the New York Times or the Washington Post. Which are both, in my mind, they've become hacks. The New York Times is an incredibly well done piece of hackery. But they both take uncredited news tips from sources that they don't name, and they publish them as stories of fact. They do that with a lot of the intelligence community's leaking of information. Interesting that the New York Times was one that Comey had leaked his little memo, aide de memoire,
Right.
About his meeting with Trump.
Through a friend of his, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think Comey really was forced to let Hillary go. I can't believe that he would actually, if he listened to the things he was saying, none of it made sense.
I was going to make exactly that point. Listening to the testimony, it made no sense whatsoever. It wasn't possible to actually follow the argumentation.
Against Trump or Hillary?
Against Trump.
Oh, well, I didn't follow that, so I can't really speak to it. But with Hillary, the woman and her aides destroyed with the hammers phones, and they put bleach bit on the tapes that she wanted to destroy, the records from her 30,000 emails. They destroyed them as best they could. And that's really obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence, et cetera, destruction of evidence.
Fits exactly the definition.
Right. And if there's an absence of intent, as Comey seemed to state or profess, then why the hell is she trying to kill all this stuff and destroy it? And if it's just to protect her reputation because some of it didn't show her well, that's still no reason to destroy evidence. And it shouldn't be allowed to happen. Anybody else did that, they'd be in jail. That
Literally.
we have a very, very fast process for sending people into jails, not so fast for getting them out. And someone like Hillary just never goes, no matter what she does. That pay and play. Right now, if I were the president, I would have the State Department investigate every single one of the pay for play activities that seem to occur when Hillary was in office. Because it's a stain on the department, and it's a deep stain. Sending Saudi Arabia all these billions of dollars worth of weapons after they donate millions and millions to the Clinton Foundation, and then going back and selling them more so they can destroy the Yemeni population.
Right.
What the hell is that all about?
What is that about?
And what does that have to do with our trying to help democracy survive? We're just allowing whoever we see as our strategic partner to beat the shit out of anybody in the neighborhood. What garbage is that?
Supporting thugs.
Yes.
Actually, Saudi Arabia has a regime of totalitarian structure, and
Yeah, and they may have more responsibility for 9/11 than our government has allowed us to know about. That's one of the things that's being held tightly. Is anything that would discredit the Saudis in our eyes?
it's
You couldn't write this. You couldn't create this in a movie. We're living through one of the most interesting times, and I've said this before, in American history. It's all falling apart, and duct tape is not going to hold it together. The only thing that'll hold it together is some honest integrity and leadership, and there's nobody that's basically poised to deliver that.
there's no one on the horizon, you say?
No. I mean, Bernie may be a candidate again. I think Bernie has a lot to answer for too. Quite honestly, it's not worth going into that right now, because he's still supporting things like the Russian story about the DNC emails and stuff like that. He's acting like a good soldier for the Democrats.
We have 1 minute left, Paul.
Oh,
We've come to the conclusion at the end of this hour that we are in a dismal state politically, and that it seems to be that we're living in interesting times and poised to have the entire mess come down around our ears.
well, bringing it right back to the beginning of the show, I think we're all experiencing our own American karmic gravitational slide.
Thank you so much for those words, Paul.
Thank you. Bye, folks. Support Cambridge Residents Alliance.
Thanks for being here, Paul. Appreciate it.
Oh, that was fun. Thank you. So I'll stop this baby? Yeah.
Thanks.
Oh, it's always fun to come and spout,
It's
and I hope I don't